The jackhammer started at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and by 8 o'clock, I watched a crack spider across my neighbor's foundation like lightning frozen in concrete. My name is Xavier Ashford, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for 6 years. I thought I knew what to expect from the homeowners association by then. Monthly newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about mailbox paint colors, threats about lawn height measurements, the usual suburban tyranny wrapped in the language of property values and community standards. But I never expected them to authorize industrial blasting 50 feet from residential properties without proper engineering surveys or notifications to affected homeowners. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when the ground shook hard enough to rattle the windows. My golden retriever, Murphy, bolted from his bed and started barking at the walls like they had personally offended him. I set down my mug and headed outside, still in my pajama pants and a faded Arizona State shirt. The noise was coming from the empty lot at the end of Saguaro Drive, the one the HOA had been fighting about for the past 2 years. They wanted to put in a community recreation center, complete with a pool, tennis courts, and a fancy clubhouse. The lot sat on bedrock, which apparently required blasting to level properly. What I did not know until that morning was that they had approved the blasting work to begin without conducting proper geological surveys of the surrounding properties. I walked down the street toward the commotion, joining a growing crowd of neighbors in various states of mourning dress. The construction crew had cordoned off the area with orange cones and caution tape that flapped in the dry desert breeze. A massive excavator sat idle while 3 workers in hard hats examined what looked like seismic equipment. That is when I saw Gerald Thompson, my next-door neighbor, standing at the edge of his driveway with his face the color of raw beef. Gerald was a retired accountant, the kind of guy who washed his truck every Sunday and knew exactly how many tiles were on his roof. He was staring at his house with his mouth hanging open. I followed his gaze and saw it immediately. A crack ran from the foundation up through the stucco exterior, jagged and dark, stretching at least 15 feet up the southwest corner of his house. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, walking over to him. "Gerald, is that new?" He turned to look at me, and I could see his hands shaking. "It was not there yesterday. I checked my irrigation system last night. That wall was perfect." Before I could respond, a silver BMW pulled up with the HOA logo on the door. Out stepped Brenda Patterson, the HOA president, wearing white capri pants and a turquoise blouse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Brenda was 53 years old, had the kind of haircut that required speaking to multiple managers to achieve, and treated the homeowners association like it was her personal fiefdom. She clicked across the asphalt in heels that had no business being worn before noon, carrying a tablet and wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. "Good morning, everyone," she called out in that saccharine voice that always preceded something terrible. I know the construction noise is a bit disruptive, but this is all part of making our community even better. The recreation center will increase all of our property values. "Brenda," Gerald's voice cracked as he shouted her name. "Brenda, look at my house." She turned toward him, tilting her head like a confused parakeet. "What seems to be the problem, Gerald? The problem?" He pointed a shaking finger at the massive crack. "The problem is your blasting just destroyed my foundation." I watched Brenda walk over, her heels clicking with each step. She pulled her sunglasses down, examined the crack for maybe 3 seconds, then pushed them back up. "I am sure that is pre-existing damage, Gerald. These houses are, 20 years old? Foundation issues are common in Arizona with the soil expansion and contraction. Pre-existing. Gerald's voice went up an octave. I just had a home inspection done 2 months ago for my refinance. There were 0 structural issues. 0. Other neighbors were starting to notice the damage. Karen Miller from across the street came over, followed by Tom and Lisa Bradford from 3 houses down. Everyone was staring at the crack, then at the construction site, then at Brenda. "I want the construction stopped immediately," Gerald said, "and I want the HOA to pay for the repairs." Brenda smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Gerald, I understand you are upset, but the HOA board voted on this project months ago. We followed all proper procedures. If you have concerns about your foundation, I suggest you contact your homeowner's insurance. You followed proper procedures." I heard myself saying, "Did you conduct geological surveys of the surrounding properties before authorizing blasting?" Brenda turned her attention to me, and I could feel the temperature drop about 10 degrees. "Xavier, this does not concern you unless you also want to make fraudulent claims against the association." "Fraudulent," Gerald sputtered. "You can see the crack right there." "I can see a crack," Brenda said, "but correlation does not equal causation. Just because the construction started today does not mean it caused your foundation issues." I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of Gerald's house, the construction site, and the distance between them. The blasting started at 7. Gerald's house was fine last night. Basic logic suggests the blasting caused the damage. Brenda's smile vanished. "Xavier, I would be very careful about making accusations against the HOA board. We have lawyers on retainer specifically for situations like this." "Are you threatening him?" Lisa Bradford asked, her voice sharp. She was a real estate attorney, and I could see her lawyer instincts kicking in. "I am simply stating facts," Brenda replied. "The HOA is a legally protected entity. We are not responsible for pre-existing conditions or act of God damage." "Blasting is not an act of God," I said. "It is an act of stupidity if you did it without proper surveys." The construction foreman, a burly guy with a sun-weathered face, wandered over. "Everything okay here?" "Did you conduct seismic impact surveys before starting the blasting?" Lisa asked him. He shrugged. "We blast where the client tells us to blast. You would need to ask whoever hired us about the surveys." "And who hired you?" I asked. "The HOA management company, Desert Valley Property Management." Brenda cut in quickly. "This conversation is over. Gerald, if you want to file a claim, you can submit it in writing to the board. We will review it at next month's meeting." "Next month?" Gerald looked like he might have a stroke. "My house is structurally compromised right now." "Then I suggest you contact a contractor," Brenda said, turning on her heel and walking back toward her BMW. I stood there with Gerald and the growing crowd of neighbors, watching her drive away. The construction crew was setting up for another blast, completely unconcerned with the chaos they had caused. "What do I do?" Gerald asked, and I realized he was talking to me. "First, call a structural engineer. Get them out here today to document everything. Second, take about 1,000 pictures from every angle. Third, call your insurance company but also talk to a lawyer." Lisa nodded. "I can recommend someone. This is going to be a property damage claim, potentially negligence. You are going to need documentation showing the timeline and causation." Gerald pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I cannot believe this is happening." Another boom shook the ground, and I felt it through the soles of my feet. Murphy started barking from inside my house. I looked at the construction site, then back at Gerald's cracked foundation, and felt anger settling in my chest like a hot coal. "I am going to find out exactly what surveys they did or did not do," I said. "This is insane." I went home and started making phone calls. First to the City of Scottsdale Building Department, then to the county. I requested copies of all permits related to the Meadowbrook Estates Recreation Center construction. The clerk I spoke with was helpful but explained it would take a few days to process the public records request. Next, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found my HOA governing documents. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions were 73 pages of legal jargon, but I started reading. Somewhere in there had to be language about the HOA's responsibility for damage caused by association-approved projects. My phone rang around 11. It was Gerald. "The structural engineer was just here," he said, his voice hollow. "The foundation has multiple compression fractures. The crack we can see is just the visible damage. He says the whole southwest corner of my house has shifted. Repairs are going to cost at least $80,000. I sat down hard on my couch. 80,000, and that is just an estimate. He said once they start the work, they might find additional damage. Xavier, I do not have that kind of money just lying around. I am retired. I am on a fixed income. What did your insurance company say?" "They are sending an adjuster tomorrow, but they already told me that if the damage was caused by construction activity, it might not be covered under my policy. They said it would be the responsibility of whoever authorized the construction. The HOA. Yeah. The HOA who just told me it is not their problem." I rubbed my face thinking, okay, document everything. Every conversation, every email, every phone call, and talk to that lawyer Lisa recommended. I already called. I have an appointment Thursday morning. After I hung up, I walked outside to look at my own house. My property line was about 100 feet from the blast site, further than Gerald's, but still close enough to worry me. I walked around the perimeter, checking the foundation, looking for any new cracks or signs of damage. Everything looked okay, but I took pictures anyway, just in case. The blasting continued throughout the day. Each boom rattled my windows and set Murphy off into another barking fit. By 5 o'clock, I counted 17 separate blasts. I started a log, noting the time and intensity of each one. That evening, I got an email from the HOA. It was a mass message to all residents in the subdivision. "Dear Meadowbrook Estates homeowners, we are excited to announce that construction has begun on our new community recreation center. Please be patient with the temporary noise and disruption. This facility will provide world-class amenities and significantly increase property values. The construction is expected to last approximately 6 months. Thank you for your cooperation. Brenda Patterson, HOA President." No mention of the foundation damage. No mention of geological surveys or seismic impact studies. Just cheerful announcements about world-class amenities. I hit reply and typed out a message asking about the surveys and about Gerald's damaged foundation. I kept my tone professional but firm. I sent it and waited. The response came an hour later. Not from Brenda, but from the HOA's property management company. "Dear Mr. Ashford, all construction activities have been properly permitted and approved by the appropriate authorities. Any concerns about individual property damage should be directed to the homeowner's insurance company. The HOA is not responsible for pre-existing conditions. Regards, Desert Valley Property Management, pre-existing conditions. They were already establishing their defense. I called Lisa Bradford. They are stonewalling. Have you heard anything from other neighbors? Actually, yes, she said. I have been making calls. At least 3 other houses on Saguaro Drive are showing signs of damage. Nothing as severe as Gerald's, but new cracks in driveways, a buckled patio, stress fractures in garage walls. Everyone says the damage appeared today after the blasting started. So this is not just Gerald's problem. Not even close. I think we need to organize the affected homeowners and approach this together. There is strength in numbers, especially when you are going up against an HOA that clearly does not want to take responsibility. We agreed to host a meeting at my house the following evening. Lisa would spread the word to everyone on Sagaro Drive and the adjacent streets. Wednesday morning brought more blasting. I was up early, already on edge, expecting it. The first explosion came at 6:58, shaking the coffee in my mug. I went outside and saw that several neighbors were already gathering on the street, all of us looking tired and angry. Gerald's house looked worse in the morning light. The crack had darkened overnight, and I could see where the stucco had actually separated from the wall in places, creating small gaps. A structural engineer's truck was parked in his driveway. I walked over. Gerald was standing in his front yard with a man in a polo shirt and khakis, both of them looking at tablets and pointing at the house. "Xavier," Gerald called when he saw me. "This is Rick Chen from Southwest Structural Engineering. Rick, this is my neighbor Xavier. He has been helping me document everything." We shook hands. Rick had the calm, measured demeanor of someone who dealt with disasters professionally. "What is the verdict?" I asked. Rick pulled up a diagram on his tablet. "The foundation has sustained significant seismic damage. Based on the crack patterns and the timeline Mr. Thompson provided, I am confident the damage was caused by the blasting. The ground vibrations exceeded safe thresholds for residential structures at this distance." "Can you prove that?" I asked. "I can provide expert testimony that the damage is consistent with seismic activity from blasting. I have also measured the distance from the blast site to the foundation, 53 feet, which is well within the danger zone for this type of work without proper safeguards." What safeguards should have been in place? Pre-blast surveys of all structures within a 500-foot radius. Seismograph monitoring during blasting to ensure vibrations stay below safe levels. Notification to all affected property owners. Possibly even temporary structural reinforcement for the closest buildings. He gestured at Gerald's house. None of that appears to have happened. Gerald looked sick. So the HOA just authorized this without any of the proper precautions. That is what it looks like, but you would need to confirm that with the permitting authority and the HOA's records. I pulled out my phone and showed Rick the email from the property management company. They are claiming everything was properly permitted. Rick read it and frowned. Permitted does not mean safe or responsible. You can get a permit to blast, but that does not absolve you of liability if you cause damage to surrounding properties. This is going to come down to whether they conducted due diligence and followed industry standards. Another blast shook the ground, and all three of us instinctively looked toward the construction site. "They are still blasting," Gerald said. "Should not they have stopped after causing damage? You would think," Rick said. "But unless someone with authority orders them to stop, they will keep going. The construction company is just following their contract." I had an idea. What if we could prove the vibrations are exceeding safe levels right now? Could that get them shut down, potentially? But you would need seismograph equipment to measure it, and those readings would need to be certified by a licensed engineer. How much would that cost? Rick thought for a moment. I could set up monitoring equipment for about $3,000, plus my time to analyze the data and produce a report. Gerald looked at me. "I cannot afford that on top of everything else. What if we split it among all the affected homeowners?" I suggested. Lisa said at least 3 other properties are showing damage. If we are going to fight this, we need evidence. "Let me make some calls," Gerald said, pulling out his phone. By noon, we had commitments from 6 homeowners to split the cost of the seismic monitoring. Rick set up his equipment that afternoon, placing sensitive instruments at various distances from the blast site. He explained that he would monitor for at least 3 days to establish a pattern of vibration levels. That evening, 19 people crowded into my living room for the neighborhood meeting. Gerald was there with his wife Patricia, a quiet woman who looked like she had been crying. Lisa Bradford came with her husband Tom. The Millers, the Johnsons, the Patel family from the corner lot, and a dozen others, all looking worried and angry. I started by summarizing what we knew. The blasting had started Tuesday morning. Multiple properties had sustained damage. The HOA was denying responsibility and claiming everything was pre-existing. We had hired a structural engineer who was now monitoring the vibration levels. The question is, what do we do now? I said. Lisa stood up. I spoke with a colleague who specializes in HOA law. Here is the situation. The HOA board has what is called the business judgment rule on their side, which means courts generally defer to board decisions unless there is evidence of bad faith or gross negligence. However, if we can prove they authorized dangerous construction without proper due diligence, we can pierce that protection. English, please, someone called out. It means we need to prove they screwed up badly enough that they are legally liable. And to do that, we need the documentation showing what they did or did not do before approving this project. How do we get that? Patricia Thompson asked. Public records requests, discovery if we file a lawsuit, and we can also request the information directly from the HOA. As homeowners, we have a right to review HOA records, including board meeting minutes and contracts. I raised my hand. I already filed a public records request with the city for the permits. That should tell us what they submitted to get approval. Good, Lisa said. We also need everyone here to document their damage. Photos, videos, contractor estimates, everything. Create a timeline showing exactly when the damage appeared. Get your own structural engineers or contractors to inspect and provide written reports. This is going to cost a fortune, Tom Miller said. He owned a small accounting firm and understood numbers. Between inspections, repairs, and legal fees, we could be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively. Which is why we need the HOA to accept responsibility, Lisa replied. But they are not going to do that voluntarily. We are going to have to force them. A younger guy I did not know well raised his hand. His name was Chris something, and he lived 4 houses down from me. What if we just refuse to pay our HOA dues until they fix this? Lisa shook her head. That is a bad idea. The HOA can put liens on your property for unpaid dues, and they will. It will hurt you more than it hurts them. So we just roll over and take it. No, I said. We fight smart. We gather evidence, we get expert opinions, and we build an airtight case. Then we present it to the board and demand they make it right. If they refuse, we lawyer up and take legal action. I am already talking to a lawyer, Gerald said quietly. I have no choice. My house is literally falling apart. The meeting went on for another hour. We divided up tasks. Lisa would draft a formal letter to the HOA board demanding they halt construction and investigate the damage. Tom Miller would create a spreadsheet tracking all the damages and costs. I volunteered to be the point person for communications with the structural engineer and to follow up on the public records requests. By the time everyone left, it was after 10 o'clock. I sat on my couch with Murphy's head in my lap, feeling exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. Patricia cannot sleep. She keeps hearing cracking sounds in the walls. I do not know if it is real or if we are both just traumatized. Thank you for organizing tonight. I felt very alone until everyone showed up. I texted back. You are not alone. We are in this together. Thursday morning, the blasting started again at 7. I was showered, dressed, and had my phone ready to record. I walked down to the construction site where Rick Chen had set up his monitoring equipment. "How are the readings?" I asked him. He showed me the tablet display with graphs and numbers that meant nothing to me. Peak particle velocity is measuring between 3 and 4 inches per second at Gerald Thompson's property line. The generally accepted safe threshold for residential structures is 0.5 inches per second. So they are exceeding safe levels by a factor of 6 to 8, at minimum. And that is just what I have recorded so far. Some of the blasts have spiked even higher. Is that enough to get them shut down? It should be. I am going to compile my preliminary findings and send them to the city building department today. They have the authority to halt construction if there is an imminent safety risk. I felt a surge of hope. How long will that take? Depends on how fast the city moves. Could be days, could be weeks. Bureaucracy is not known for its speed. I thanked him and headed back home. I had a conference call for work at 9, and I was already behind on a project deadline because of all the HOA chaos. But as I tried to focus on database architecture, another blast rattled my windows and scattered my concentration. Around 11, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Ashford, this is Vanessa Hughes from the Arizona Daily Star. I understand there is a situation with your homeowners association and some property damage from blasting. Would you be willing to speak with me?" I sat up straight. "How did you hear about this?" "I have a source in the building department who tips me off about interesting permit issues." "Your situation came across their desk." I thought for a moment. Media attention could help or hurt us. But if the HOA was going to stonewall, maybe public pressure was exactly what we needed. "I would be happy to talk," I said, "but I am not the only affected homeowner. Can I connect you with some others?" "Absolutely. I am hoping to run a story this weekend if I can get enough information and some good photos." I gave her Gerald's number and Lisa's, then spent 20 minutes explaining the situation. Vanessa asked good questions, took detailed notes, and requested photos of the damage. By the time we hung up, I felt like maybe we were starting to gain some traction. That afternoon, I got an email notification that my public records request was ready for pickup. I drove to the Scottsdale Municipal Center and collected a thick folder of documents. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and started reading. The permits were all there. Excavation permit, blasting permit, grading permit. Everything looked official and properly stamped. But as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. The blasting permit application included a section for seismic impact assessment. It was marked to be provided by contractor prior to commencement of work. I flipped through the rest of the documents. There was no seismic impact assessment. No geological survey. No list of properties within the blast radius that had been notified or inspected. The permit had been issued conditionally, pending the submission of these documents, but there was no evidence they had ever been submitted. I took photos of every page and sent them to Lisa with a message. "I think we have them." She called me 5 minutes later. "Oh, this is good. This is very good. They blasted without fulfilling the permit conditions. That is a violation of city code, and it opens them up to massive liability." What do we do with this? First, I am sending it to Vanessa Hughes for her article. Second, I am including it in our formal demand letter to the HOA. Third, I am calling the city building department right now to file a complaint. Things started moving fast after that. Friday morning, a city inspector showed up at the construction site. The blasting stopped. I watched from my front yard as the inspector spent 2 hours examining the site, taking measurements, and having what looked like a very serious conversation with the construction foreman. By noon, there was a red stop work order posted on the fence surrounding the construction site. Gerald called me, his voice cracking with relief. "Did you see? They stopped them." I saw. Lisa's call to the city must have worked. The inspector came by my house. He took pictures of the damage and asked me a bunch of questions about the timeline. He said the permit was issued conditionally and the conditions were never met. He looked angry. Friday afternoon, I got an email from Brenda Patterson. It was not addressed just to me but to all homeowners in the subdivision. "Dear Meadowbrook Estates residents, due to unforeseen circumstances, construction on the recreation center has been temporarily paused. We expect this delay to be brief and will update you as we have more information. Please be assured that the HOA board is working diligently to move this important project forward. Thank you for your patience." No mention of the stop work order, no mention of the property damage, no mention of permits or violations. I forwarded the email to Lisa with a note. "She is still pretending this is just a minor inconvenience." Lisa replied, "Not for long. Vanessa's article is running tomorrow." Saturday morning, the Arizona Daily Star's website featured a story with the headline, "Scottsdale HOA faces backlash after unauthorized blasting damages homes." The article included photos of Gerald's cracked foundation, quotes from Rick Chen about the dangerous vibration levels, and copies of the incomplete permit documents I had obtained. Vanessa had done her homework, pulling in additional commentary from a law professor about HOA liability, and from a city council member who expressed concern about the permit process. The article also included a statement from Brenda Patterson. "The HOA board takes all homeowner concerns seriously and is committed to investigating this matter thoroughly. We believe the damage is unrelated to our construction project, but we will review all available evidence." I read that quote 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise. Even with all the evidence, even with the stop work order, she was still denying responsibility. My phone started ringing. Local news stations wanted interviews. Neighbors who had not been at the meeting were calling to ask what was happening. The subdivision Facebook group exploded with angry comments. By Sunday, the story had been picked up by the Phoenix news stations. A TV crew came out to film Gerald's house and interview him in his front yard. I watched the evening news that night and saw my neighborhood on screen, with a reporter standing in front of the construction site explaining the controversy. Monday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's law firm. It was 2 pages of legal threats, warning me against making defamatory statements about the association, and reminding me of my obligations under the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It specifically mentioned my conversations with the media and suggested I was violating my duty to the community. I called Lisa immediately. "They are threatening me," she laughed, which was not the reaction I expected. "Oh, Xavier, this is perfect. This is exactly what I hoped they would do." How is threatening me perfect? Because it shows they are worried. If they had a strong case, they would not be trying to intimidate you into silence. This letter is going to look terrible if this ends up in court. Save it. Document everything. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. According to the notice posted on the community website, it would be held Wednesday evening at the subdivision clubhouse. The agenda included one item: discussion and potential action regarding recreation center construction. Lisa, Gerald, and I agreed to attend along with as many affected homeowners as possible. Tuesday brought more developments. Rick Chen completed his full analysis of the seismic monitoring data. His report concluded that the blasting had produced ground vibrations, substantially exceeding industry safety standards for residential areas, and that the damage to Gerald's foundation and the other affected properties was consistent with and likely caused by excessive seismic activity from blasting operations. The report was 30 pages of technical analysis, graphs, and photographs. It was exactly the kind of evidence we needed. Meanwhile, the city building department issued a violation notice to the HOA and the construction company, citing failure to comply with permit conditions and conducting dangerous operations without proper safeguards. The notice included a fine of $50,000 and required the submission of a comprehensive safety plan before any work could resume. I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, justice might actually happen. Wednesday evening, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls. I recognized most of them as residents of Meadowbrook Estates, but I also noticed a few reporters with cameras and notepads. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Brenda Patterson in the center, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized but had never really talked to. They all looked uncomfortable except Brenda, who had her usual fake smile plastered on. She called the meeting to order and started reading through the usual procedural nonsense. Roll call, approval of previous meeting minutes, treasurer's report. People in the audience were getting restless. Finally, she reached the main agenda item. As you all know, we have experienced some challenges with the recreation center project. The board wants to assure everyone that we are taking these concerns seriously. Gerald stood up. Concerns? You destroyed my house. Brenda's smile tightened. Mr. Thompson, you will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period. I am speaking now. You authorized blasting 50 feet from residential properties without proper safety measures. You violated the permit conditions. You have caused over $100,000 in damage to neighborhood homes, and you have done nothing but deny responsibility. The room erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Brenda banged a gavel. Order. We will have order, or I will clear this meeting. Lisa stood up. Mrs. Patterson, with all due respect, you do not get to clear a homeowners meeting. Every resident has a right to be here and to speak. One of the other board members, a nervous-looking man named Stewart, leaned toward his microphone. Perhaps we should hear from the homeowners. This is clearly a situation that requires discussion. Brenda shot him a look that could have melted steel, but she nodded. Fine. Public comment. 3 minutes per person. Gerald went first, describing the damage to his house in excruciating detail and presenting copies of Rick Chen's report. He was followed by Tom Miller, who had stress cracks in his garage. Then Patricia Thompson, who talked about not feeling safe in her own home. Then Chris from down the street, whose driveway had buckled. One by one, affected homeowners stood up and told their stories. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Stewart looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Another board member, a woman named Deanne, was taking notes furiously. When it was my turn, I focused on the permit violations. I projected copies of the documents on the screen and walked through exactly what the HOA had failed to do. You had a responsibility to ensure this work was done safely, I said. You failed. You put the construction schedule and the project budget ahead of homeowner safety, and now you are trying to avoid accountability. Brenda cut me off. Your time is up, Mr. Ashford. I am not finished. Your time is up. Lisa stood. Then I would like my 3 minutes. She proceeded to lay out the legal liability the HOA was facing, citing specific Arizona statutes and case law. She explained that the business judgment rule would not protect the board because they had failed to conduct basic due diligence. She mentioned potential causes of action including negligence, nuisance, and breach of fiduciary duty. By the time she finished, the board looked genuinely shaken. The meeting went on for 3 hours. Homeowners vented their anger and frustration. The reporters scribbled notes. Brenda tried to maintain control, but it was clear she had lost the room. Finally, Deanne, the board member who had been taking notes, spoke up. "I think we need to acknowledge that mistakes were made. I was not on the board when this project was initially approved, but looking at the evidence presented tonight, it is clear that proper procedures were not followed." Brenda turned on her. "Deanne, we discussed our position on this. I understand, but I am not comfortable defending the indefensible. We have a stop work order from the city. We have documentation showing permit violations. We have professional engineering reports showing excessive vibrations. We have actual damage to homes. At some point, we have to face reality." Stewart nodded. "I agree with Deanne. I think we need to bring in an independent investigator and seriously consider our liability here." Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "This board voted to move forward with the recreation center. We voted to hire the contractor. We cannot just abandon the project because a few homeowners are making complaints." "A few homeowners?" Gerald's voice rang out. "There are at least 8 properties with documented damage, and probably more that have not been inspected yet." Another board member, a quiet older man named Frank, cleared his throat. "I move that we halt all construction activities pending a complete third-party review of the safety procedures and the property damage claims." "Second," Deanne said immediately. Brenda's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. We do not need a motion. The city already issued the stop work order." "Then the motion should be easy to pass," Frank said calmly. "All in favor?" Deanne, Stewart, and Frank raised their hands. The fourth board member, a younger woman named Michelle who had not said a word all night, hesitated, then raised her hand too. "Motion passes 4-1, Frank said. Brenda stood up, gathering her papers. "Fine. I hope you are all happy when we get sued by the construction company for breach of contract, and your HOA dues double to cover the legal fees." She walked out of the meeting, heels clicking on the tile floor. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Stewart cleared his throat. "I apologize for the president's behavior. I think emotions are running high, but I want to assure everyone that the remaining board members are committed to investigating this situation properly and making it right." Lisa stood again. "What does that mean specifically? What is the HOA prepared to do for the homeowners whose properties have been damaged?" "We need to consult with our insurance carrier and our legal counsel," Stewart said. "But speaking personally, if the HOA's actions caused damage to your homes, then the HOA should pay for the repairs." It was not a commitment, but it was more than we had gotten from Brenda. The meeting finally adjourned close to 11. I walked out with Gerald and Lisa, all of us exhausted but feeling like maybe we had turned a corner. "Did that actually just happen?" Gerald asked. "Did 4 board members just vote against Brenda?" "They saw which way the wind was blowing," Lisa said. "This story is all over the news. They are facing city violations and probable lawsuits. The smart ones are trying to get ahead of it." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait and see if they actually follow through. If they do not, we file suit." Over the next 2 weeks, things moved in unexpected directions. Brenda Patterson resigned from the HOA board via email, citing personal reasons and the hostile environment created by certain homeowners. Stewart became the interim president. The HOA hired a different law firm, one that specialized in insurance claims and liability management. They also hired an independent investigation firm to review everything that had happened. I spent hours being interviewed by the investigators, walking them through the timeline, providing documentation, explaining what I knew and when I knew it. They interviewed all the affected homeowners, the structural engineers, the construction company, and the city building inspectors. Their report came back 6 weeks after the blasting had stopped. It was blunt and damning. The HOA board, specifically Brenda Patterson as president, had pushed to expedite the recreation center project without ensuring proper safety protocols were in place. They had accepted the construction company's assurances without independent verification. They had failed to notify affected homeowners. They had not conducted pre-blast surveys. They had not required seismic monitoring. The report concluded that the blasting had directly caused damage to at least 11 properties, and that the HOA was legally and financially responsible. The new board, minus Brenda, voted unanimously to accept the findings and to work with affected homeowners on repair settlements. Gerald was one of the first to reach a settlement. The HOA's insurance carrier agreed to pay for all foundation repairs, plus temporary housing costs while the work was being done, plus a settlement for diminished property value and emotional distress. The total came to around $120,000. Other affected homeowners negotiated similar settlements. Tom Miller got his garage repaired. Chris got his driveway replaced. The Patel family got foundation work done on their corner lot. I ended up with a small settlement too. A subsequent inspection of my property had found minor foundation cracks that the engineer attributed to the blasting. Nothing like Gerald's damage, but enough to warrant repairs. The HOA paid for the work and gave me a $5,000 settlement to close the matter. But the story did not end with settlements. In September, about 4 months after the blasting incident, I got a call from a detective with the Scottsdale Police Department. His name was Detective Martinez, and he wanted to talk to me about the HOA situation. We met at a coffee shop near my house. Detective Martinez was in his 40s, with gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much. "I am investigating possible criminal fraud related to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA," he said, pulling out a notepad. "Specifically involving Brenda Patterson and the Recreation Center project." I sat up straighter. Criminal fraud. We received information suggesting that Mrs. Patterson may have had a financial interest in the construction company hired for the project. If that is true, and she did not disclose that conflict of interest to the board or the homeowners, that could constitute fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. "How did you find this out?" An anonymous tip, which we then corroborated with financial records and witness statements. I cannot share details of an ongoing investigation, but I wanted to ask what you observed during your interactions with Mrs. Patterson and the board. I told him everything. The way Brenda had pushed the project through. How she had dismissed concerns about safety. Her immediate denial of responsibility when the damage occurred. The threatening letter her lawyers had sent me. Detective Martinez took notes and asked follow-up questions. When we were done, he thanked me and said he would be in touch. 2 weeks later, the Arizona Daily Star ran another story. Former HOA president arrested on fraud charges. The article explained that Brenda Patterson had been secretly receiving kickbacks from the construction company in exchange for awarding them the recreation center contract. She had created a shell company to hide the payments. The amount totaled over $200,000. She was charged with fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her husband, who apparently knew nothing about it, filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. The HOA board, now fully reformed with new members, voted to terminate the recreation center project entirely. The lot was sold to a developer who built 4 new houses on it instead. The proceeds helped replenish the HOA's reserves, which had been depleted by the legal settlements. Gerald and Patricia eventually sold their house once the foundation repairs were complete. The damage had been fixed, but they told me they could never feel comfortable there again. They moved to a house in a subdivision without an HOA, and I could not blame them. I stayed in Meadowbrook Estates. The new board was actually reasonable, focused on basic maintenance and community safety rather than grand projects and power trips. We got a new president, a retired engineer named David, who insisted on transparency and proper procedures for everything. The construction site sat empty for months, a reminder of what had happened. Eventually, the new developer came in and the houses went up. They were nice homes, built properly with all the right permits and inspections. I still see Lisa Bradford at neighborhood events. She ended up joining the HOA board herself, determined to make sure nothing like the blasting incident ever happened again. Tom Miller helped restructure the HOA's financial oversight procedures. Several of us who had been through the whole ordeal became much more active in association governance, attending meetings and reviewing proposed projects. Murphy got used to the quiet again, no longer jumping at every sound. My foundation was repaired and certified sound. The crack in Gerald's former house was invisible under the new stucco, though I knew it was there, a hidden scar from that chaotic spring. Brenda Patterson eventually took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and affected homeowners. Her mugshot made the local news, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness seeing it. She had let greed and ego destroy her life and hurt a lot of people in the process. The whole experience taught me things I never expected to learn about homeowners associations, liability, construction safety, and how quickly things can spiral out of control when people in positions of authority stop caring about the people they are supposed to serve. I also learned that standing up to bullies, even official ones with bylaws and lawyers, is possible if you are willing to document everything, gather allies, and refuse to back down. The HOA had all the power on paper, but they did not have truth or evidence on their side, and in the end, that mattered. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after everything had settled, I was in my front yard washing my truck when a car pulled up. Gerald and Patricia got out, smiling. "We were in the neighborhood and wanted to say hello," Gerald said, shaking my hand. "We sat on my patio and caught up. They were happy in their new place." Patricia had started a garden. Gerald had joined a woodworking club. They looked relaxed in a way I had not seen during the crisis. "I still think about that crack sometimes," Gerald admitted. "Waking up and seeing my house literally breaking apart, it was the most helpless I have ever felt." "But you fought back," I said. "We all did." "Because you organized everyone," Patricia said. "If you had not brought us together, Brenda would have gotten away with it. We would have all been fighting alone, and she would have crushed us individually." I had not really thought about it that way, but she was right. The HOA's power came from treating homeowners as isolated units. Once we started working together, sharing information and resources, that power evaporated. After they left, I sat on my patio as the sun set, casting long shadows across Saguaro Drive. The street was quiet except for the sound of kids playing somewhere down the block. Everything looked normal and peaceful, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Under the surface of every subdivision, every homeowners association, every covenant and restriction, there were potential conflicts waiting to erupt. The key was being ready, being informed, and being willing to fight when necessary. I finished my beer and went inside to make dinner. Murphy followed me, his tail wagging. Life had returned to normal, but I would never take that normalcy for granted again. I had learned too much about how quickly it could all fall apart. The Meadowbrook Estates Recreation Center was never built. The 4 new houses that replaced it were occupied by families who probably had no idea what had happened on that lot. The history was buried, like Gerald's foundation crack, invisible but not forgotten by those who lived through it. Sometimes I drive past Gerald's old house and see the new owners working in the yard. The house looks perfect, the stucco smooth and unblemished. They have no idea about the chaos and fear and anger that once consumed that property. And maybe that is for the best, but for me, and for everyone else who was there during those intense months, the memory remains sharp. The sound of blasting that shook our windows and cracked our foundations. The sight of Brenda Patterson walking away from the emergency meeting, refusing to acknowledge reality. The stress of documenting damage, hiring engineers, fighting bureaucracy, and wondering if we would ever see justice. We did see justice eventually. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The damages were repaired. The guilty were punished. The system, pushed hard enough and in the right ways, actually worked. I think about that sometimes when I am reading about other HOA disputes online. Other homeowners trapped in battles with associations that seem untouchable. I want to tell them what I learned. Document everything, find allies, get expert opinions, use the media when appropriate, and never, ever back down when you are right. The law is not always on the side of homeowners dealing with HOAs, but when an association crosses the line into negligence or fraud, the protections they usually enjoy can vanish. The key is proving they crossed that line, which requires evidence, persistence, and often a significant investment of time and money. Was it worth it? I think so. My settlement barely covered my time and stress, but Gerald got his house fixed and his compensation. The neighborhood was safer with a reformed board. Brenda Patterson faced consequences for her corruption. The system was not perfect, but it was functional enough to reach a reasonable outcome. And I learned that I was capable of standing up to institutional power when necessary. That knowledge has value beyond any financial settlement. It changed how I think about community involvement, civic responsibility, and the importance of paying attention to who is making decisions that affect your life. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA still exists, of course. We still have monthly dues and rules about lawn maintenance and architectural guidelines. But the tone is different now. The board is more transparent. Homeowners are more engaged. There is a healthy skepticism about ambitious projects and a strong emphasis on safety and due diligence. Every time I write that monthly HOA check, I remember what happened when an association board lost sight of their actual purpose: serving the community, protecting property values, and maintaining common areas. Not building monuments to their own ambitions, not enriching themselves through corruption, not putting projects ahead of people. The story of the blasting incident became part of Meadowbrook Estates lore. New homeowners sometimes ask about it during neighborhood gatherings. The details get fuzzy over time, but the core lesson remains. An HOA is only as good or as bad as the people running it, and homeowners have both the right and the responsibility to hold those people accountable. I still live on Saguaro Drive, still wash my truck on Saturday afternoons, still take Murphy for walks around the subdivision. But I pay more attention now to the HOA meeting agendas, the board elections, the proposed projects. I learned that vigilance is the price of peaceful suburban living when you are governed by a homeowners association. And on quiet mornings, when the desert air is still cool and the neighborhood is just waking up, I sometimes walk down to the end of the street where the blasting happened. The houses that replaced the construction site are beautiful and well built. Families live there, kids play in the yards, everything is normal and peaceful. But I remember the ground shaking, the windows rattling, and the cracks spreading across Gerald's foundation like a wound opening in the earth. I remember the fear and the anger and the long fight for accountability. I remember how close we came to being steamrolled by an association that thought it was untouchable. Those memories keep me alert, keep me involved, keep me ready to fight again if necessary. Because while justice prevailed this time, there are no guarantees it always will. The only guarantee is that homeowners who stay silent and passive will be ignored or exploited. Those who organize, document, and persist at least have a fighting chance. That is the real lesson of the Meadowbrook Estates blasting incident. Not that the system works perfectly, but that it can be made to work if you push hard enough in the right ways. Not that justice is automatic, but that it is achievable with effort, evidence, and determination. I carry that lesson with me every day, along with the satisfaction of knowing we did not just accept what happened to us. We fought back, we held people accountable, and we made our community better and safer in the process. That is worth more than any settlement check or news coverage. It is worth the knowledge that when my foundation was threatened, literally and metaphorically, I stood firm and refused to crack.